Hi, in this video I want to have a look at what the best guitars are for playing fingerpicking guitar. In this video I want to look at how to choose a guitar for playing fingerpicking music. Now, a lot of what you want from it will be personal preference, the type of sound you want to create, how you want the guitar to feel when you play it and such like. So a lot really is personal preference, but what I want to do in this video is go through some of the things you might want to consider when looking at a guitar, and I'll also show you some of the guitars I've got and some of the advantages and disadvantages of those guitars for fingerpicking. The first thing you might want to consider is the scale length of the guitar. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about what the scale length is, I'll do that in another video, but basically it's the length from the nut to the bridge here, and it controls the length of the string that's actually vibrating and making the note. Now, if you've got a guitar with a longer scale length, what you're going to get is you're going to get the strings under higher tension. So that means you're going to get crisper notes but less sustain on them. It also means you probably have to use slightly lighter gauge strings on your guitar as well, because you need to put more pressure on it to fret the notes because of the higher tension. So if you want a more trebly sound but with sharp notes coming out, then maybe a longer scale length's what you're after. Shorter scale length, the notes vibrate more, so you get a wee bit more sustain from them. It also allows you to put on heavier gauge strings, which give a richer, fuller sound when playing them. And it doesn't, because of the lower tension, you can put these heavier gauge strings on and not make it unplayable because you have to use so much pressure to push them down. So certainly think about that if you're purchasing a guitar. Personally, I like a slightly shorter scale length, because I can put on slightly heavier gauge strings that give that fuller sound without having too much, requiring too much pressure to fret the notes. Okay, the next thing to consider is the action on the guitar. Now, the action is the distance between the string and the fretboard there. Often people want to go for a low action. A lower action means you don't have to press the string down as far to make the note. So a low action is good if you're wanting to do fairly, you want to do fast single note runs and things like that. Also makes it easier to form chords, because you have to push the string down less. So usually a lower action's favoured. However, there are times you will want a guitar with a higher action. If you want to put heavy gauge strings on your guitar, you might want a slightly higher action on it, just so that they've got a bit of clearance from the frets to avoid buzzing. You also might want a slightly higher action if you're wanting to use a slide as well. Because when you're playing with a slide, you don't want anything hitting the frets. You want a bit of distance between the strings and those frets. So maybe if you're going to be playing a lot of slide, think about a guitar with a slightly higher action. But certainly look at the guitars, because the action does vary quite considerably amongst them. Another thing you might want to consider is the width between the strings. Now, I think this is very important when choosing a guitar for fingerpicking. Often you'll find that the strings are quite close together, and this might be great if you're doing your Yngwie Malmsteen bit and putting out 1,000 notes a second. You want the strings all close by because you want to minimize the distance you're moving. But when you're playing fingerstyle guitar, you want a bit of distance. And the reason is because you want to get your fingers into these strings without them touching the other strings. Now, I have quite, short, stubby fingers for playing the guitar. So I like to make sure that the strings have got quite a bit of width to them. For this reason, I also don't use a finger pick on my thumb, so I pick with my thumb. And because of that, I have to get my thumb into the string to play it, and the last thing I want is it catching the string above when I'm putting it into play. So I like a nice wider width between the strings. So that's certainly another consideration. I think if you are going to be playing fingerstyle music, you're going to want a guitar where the strings are quite wide across the neck like that. Okay, the last thing you might want to consider is the body of the guitar, because they do actually vary quite a bit. So on acoustic guitars, your body here basically forms your sound box that makes the sound of the note. Now, this guitar here is a small body acoustic, so the body's slightly smaller than your standard acoustic, and what this does is it doesn't make the bass notes as prominent when you play them. So it has a nice balanced tone to it without the bass notes ringing out too much, but it certainly favours the trebly side of the music you're playing. So if you're wanting a more prominent treble sound, you might want to go for a smaller body. Another thing about it is it also keeps the volume down a wee bit. But definitely, if you don't want the bass notes as prominent, you might want to look at a smaller body. If I get this guitar here, this is a standard size Dreadnaught Acoustic with a full size sort of Dreadnaught sound box here, and you know, when I pick it up it feels considerably bigger. And what this does is it'll give a fuller sound, it'll let the bass notes ring out more, and it'll be louder as well. And you can hear that when I play, you know, the bass notes are far more prominent in it. So you might want to consider, you know, going for something like that. If you're wanting more prominent bass notes in your music, go for a bigger body. Another thing worth considering is whether to pick a resonator or not. Now, most people won't go near resonators because it's really only used for blues music, but what a resonator has is this resonator core in it that helps amplify the sound that comes out of it, and it's used a lot in blues music. And what it does is it amplifies the sound coming out, and it also gives it quite a ringy metal sound to it, which is really nice in blues music. You know, I love the sound that comes out of that. Now, there are different options for resonators. This one's a wooden body with the resonator core in it, which I like because it isn't too harsh, the sound. The wooden body helps mellow the sound from the resonator a wee bit. Your more common resonators are metal bodied with the resonator core, and they give a far ringier, harsher sound out of them. But if that's what you like, then you know that's what to go for. But certainly if you're playing blues music, consider resonators as well, you know, and whether the guitar's got this resonator core in it. So body shape and body type is something you also have to consider, so you can get one that gives you the sound you want. Okay, I think they're the main things you should be looking at when you're looking to get a guitar for finger picking. Now what I want to do is go through the guitars that I have, well, the acoustic guitars, and have a look at them and show you some of the pros and cons for playing finger picking guitar. Okay, the first guitar I want to have a look at is this small body acoustic here. Now, this is quite a long scale length, so the strings have to be at quite a high tension on it. So what it tends to give is quite a sharp sound, and it's quite a trebly sound as well, because a small body doesn't let the bass strings ring out. It has quite a low action, so it's good for single note stuff, if you want to play fast single note stuff. The downside to me is that the strings are quite close together, too close together that I find that comfortable for playing fingerstyle. I mean, it's obviously possible, like so, but they are quite close together, and you know, the strings don't give me as much space as I would like, so I don't use it too much for playing fingerstyle music. The low action as well means it's not great for using a slide on. either. So it's, it's good in some circumstances. If I wanted to do a piece that was heavy on the treble side, wanted to downplay the bass notes and wasn't using a slide, this might be the best guitar, but it's not one I would really recommend for using for finger picking music. The next one I want to have a look at is this acoustic here. Now this has got the Dreadnaught size to it, so you get the bass notes ringing out quite dominantly. It's got a long scale length, so the strings are under quite a bit of tension, so it is going to give quite a powerful sound when playing it, so it's good in that respect. The downsides of this again are the strings are quite close together. This is just a standard acoustic that you probably use for chunking out chords and things like that. And I find the strings are a bit too close together. I mean, it's perfectly playable for finger picking, but for my preference, I prefer ones with a wider string. In terms of the action was quite low on this guitar, but I've actually raised it considerably because I wanted to use it as a guitar for playing with slide. I've been playing things where you've got to use the slide across all 6 strings, and you really need a very high action for that. So this guitar's been set up differently, but in its standard form, it would have had quite a low action. So basically, it's much the same as the previous acoustic. It has the same pros and cons, it just has a different sound. So if I was wanting that sound that this guitar gives, that's what I'd use for finger picking, but it really wouldn't be my first choice either. Next guitar I want to have a look at is this Resonator. Now I like this guitar for playing finger picking music. It has a slightly shorter scale length, so what that means is I can put on heavier gauge strings, and I won't need to use too much tension to fret the notes. So that gives that nice, full fat sound that I'm looking for, and without having to use so much pressure on the strings. Another thing I like about this guitar is the width of the strings. They've got quite a bit of width to them. There's quite a gap between each string across the fretboard like that. So that's good for getting my fingers in to play the strings like that and pick the strings. So that's good. The Resonator core is great as well because it gives me that bluesy sound as well. And like I said, with a wooden body, it isn't that harsh way the metal body Resonator sounds. So I like the sound as well. In terms of the action is quite low on it, but not ridiculously low on it. So I can play it with a slide, so that option's available. However, if I was to use a slide across all 6 strings, what I find is that it's just getting a bit too close to the fretboard. So it's good for using the slide for, say, single note stuff, but when it comes to using a slide, where I need to go across all 6 strings, I find it just a wee bit low for that. But I think it provides a nice balance because it's easy to fret the notes. Easy to fret the notes, plus I can use the slide in some circumstances. It's got, nice width between the strings and a good scale length. So yeah, when I'm playing finger picking blues guitar, this is a guitar that I'm going to go for. But I will show you some others as well. The next guitar I want to show you is a classical guitar. Now, when you're playing classical guitar, it is finger style, it is finger picking you're going to be doing. So it comes as no surprise that classical guitars are designed to be good for picking. So what you have quite a long scale length on a classical guitar, but because the strings are nylon, you don't get that tension that you would with metal strings. And I know that the bottom strings are metal, but they're metal wound nylon, so again, you don't have that tension on them. In terms of the width of the strings, they are very widely spaced apart. And this is really, really good for finger picking. You can really get your fingers into these strings without fear of hitting other strings. like that. So it's really good in that respect. Another thing about a classical guitar, and I haven't touched on this yet, that's different from acoustics is it has a flat fretboard on it. And this is great, you know, if you're picking out notes like that. And it is good for you know, like playing finger style where you've got all the individual notes getting played across all the strings. The downside of a flat fretboard is, especially the wider strings, is it makes it quite hard to bar across all 6 strings. Because your finger, when you press it down, has a slight curve to it. When you're on a flat fretboard, you've got to really get your finger down to make a full bar. Plus the width of the strings on this makes barring quite difficult. But at the very least, it's relatively low tension, the strings, so it's not that hard, but it is harder to do a full bar on a classical guitar. So although it sounds perfect, there are some downsides, or one main downside, and that is the strings. They're nylon. Now nylon gives a beautiful sound. It gives a warm, rich sound. You know, it gives just such a warm, mellow sound, but that's not what I'm looking for. In blues music, I want a harsher sound from my guitar. You know, so the nylon strings are not the sound that I'm looking for when playing this guitar, you know, when playing blues music. So in that respect, it really knocks using a classical guitar on the head. I've used it plenty for playing blues music, but it just doesn't give that strident, harsh sound that I'm looking for. You may think if it's just the strings that are the problem, restring it with metal strings, but that won't work for a number of reasons, and definitely don't restring a classical guitar with metal strings. One reason is the metal strings go at higher tension, so if you put metal strings on with the long scale length, you'll find it's extremely hard to press down the frets. And another reason why you really shouldn't put them on is because of this extra tension, you're putting too much tension on the guitar for what it was designed for. So what you could end up is with bowing of the neck or something like that. So although it seems like a good idea in theory, putting metal strings on a classical guitar, don't do it. It won't be greatly playable, and you're likely to damage your guitar. But certainly a classical guitar is a good guitar for finger picking, but it just doesn't give the tone that I'm looking for. Okay, the last guitar I just want to touch upon is a 12 string. Now I haven't played this in years, which is why it's covered in dust. And the reason I want to touch on 12 strings is you can use 12 strings for finger picking. I mean, Leo Kottke uses them a lot, but again, I don't recommend it. It's very, very difficult to do finger picking on a 12 string guitar. It's a technique you really have to learn. And like most 12 string guitars, the strings are just far too close together on this one to do it. So you're not going to be finger picking on a 12 string guitar, but you can if you take 6 of the strings off. So, you know, the way it is now with all 12 strings on, there isn't much distance between each of the strings or each of the courses of strings on it. But if you were to take off one of the strings on each of the 6 courses, what you would have is a guitar with quite a bit of distance between the strings. So that is an option. If you're finding that any of the acoustic guitars you're playing, the strings are just too close together, maybe try getting a 12 string and just stringing it with 6 strings. And that is really a good option for doing this. I don't do it because occasionally, very occasionally, I actually like playing it as a 12 string because I like the sound that comes out of it. But just to let you know, that option's there as well for getting a guitar for playing finger picking guitar. So that's really about it. I've had a look at the guitars I have. I've had a look at the things to consider when looking for a guitar for finger picking. But one thing I do recommend is when you're going out to get a guitar, try it first. Don't, I mean, I know there's plenty of online guitar shops and I've bought from them before, but regardless of reviews or anything like that, or regardless of price, it has to feel right for you. And the only way you'll know if it's right for you is by playing it. So I would recommend, if you're looking for a guitar and you've got a big guitar shop locally, go in and try the different guitars. Like I said, a lot of this is personal preference, so you have to get a guitar that feels right for you and sounds right for the music you're playing. Okay, there's some of the things to consider when you're looking for a guitar for playing finger picking music. Now, in this video, I've only looked at acoustic guitars and not electric guitars. And although a lot of the principles I've talked about, such as scale length, the width of the strings, etc., are just as applicable to electric guitars, when you're looking at the sound you're getting from an electric, a lot of it is to do with the amplifier you have, the amp settings, the pickups and things like that. So I can have a look at electrics in a different video. But if you're like me and you play a lot of fingerstyle music, chances are you'll be using an acoustic most of the time to do it anyway. But I hope this video is giving you some things to think about and some things that you can consider when buying your next guitar for playing fingerpicking music. Thanks for watching.